Hello and welcome to Best Friends the Sequel. My name's Mike and today we're going to be talking about The Mummy, so let's get started. So this movie is written and directed by Stephen Sommers, whose most recent well-known work before this was The Jungle Book. Interesting pivot. It stars Brendan Fraser, whose most known film before this one was George of the Jungle. Yeah. So right away we're greeted by a pretty cool transition where it goes from the Universal Studios logo into the bright desert sun. I feel like a lot of movies in the 90s did transitions really well in that time. The music is also really good. It kind of sets the tone for the whole movie. And the composer, Jerry Goldsmith, has also done music for some other things you might recognize like Star Trek Picard, Rambo, and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. So the camera pans across the CGI Egypt, which doesn't look too bad for the 90s. We're greeted by the narrator, Oded Fehr, who plays the Ultra Magi warrior Ardeth Bey. I'm probably not saying those names right. So Ardeth lets us know right away that we're in Thebes City in the Living, which is the home of the pharaoh and Imhotep, one of the main characters who ends up becoming the mummy. And he seems like he has a pretty cushy life. He gets to live in the palace. But of course, he falls in love, or maybe falls in lust, with the pharaoh's wife, girlfriend. We're not really sure what she is. All we really know is that she seems to walk around naked most of the time. So next, the narrator lets us know that Imhotep and Anck-su-namun, who is the pharaoh's girlfriend / wife, we're not really sure, they're in love. And for some reason, they're making out in the pharaoh's house instead of someplace in secret, which would probably be safer. So the pharaoh comes home early and he looks at Imhotep's priest and he's like, "What are you guys doing here?" We're never really told how Imhotep or Imhotep's priests got into the pharaoh's house without the guards stopping them. I mean, obviously Imhotep is like the head priest, so I'm sure he gets some privileges, but those guards were nowhere to be found until he was getting stabbed to death. So the pharaoh walks through the hallways. He walks up to Anck-su-namun and she's like, "What? I'm not doing anything suspicious." And then he's like, "Who's touched you?" So the pharaoh turns around and Imhotep's like, and he grabs the pharaoh's sword and then the two of them just start hacking away at the pharaoh and he's just like, "Ah! Ah! Ah!" So Anck-su-namun is like, "Go, run, you're the only one that can resurrect me." And Imhotep's like, No, I have to save you." And she's like, "Go, run." We've never seen Imhotep resurrect someone, and there's no indication that he's resurrected someone before, so I'm not sure why she has so much confidence that he's going to be able to resurrect her. We're also never told why she couldn't just escape with him, since he only had like a 3-second lead on her. Alright, hair change. So next up we see Imhotep on his way to Hamunaptra, the city of the dead, which is where the majority of the movie will take place from here on out. Again, I'm not sure why Imhotep and his priests can just walk into the city of the dead, Hamunaptra, where they keep most of the gold and the wealth from all the pharaohs and their sons. So he's there at Hamunaptra to resurrect Anck-su-namun when the Magi show up and stop him at the last minute. I'm not really sure what the point of that was, because if he had been able to resurrect her completely, they would have been able to punish her too. I'm also not sure why they didn't have Imhotep resurrect the pharaoh. So the next thing the narrator tells us is that Imhotep's priests are sentenced to be mummified alive.
Priests were condemned to be mummified alive,
which apparently is a thing, and you can get it done, I think, for like $60,000. Imhotep, though, gets sentenced to a far worse fate.
For Imhotep, he was condemned to endure the home dive,
which is having his tongue cut off and his eyes taken out of his face, and then he's put and locked into a sarcophagus with a bunch of scarabs that are going to eat him alive very slowly, and then they lock that sarcophagus up with a key, because if he ever comes back, if somebody else ever resurrects him, apparently he's going to become a supervillain with superpowers, and he's going to destroy everything. I'm not really sure why you would make a key for a sarcophagus that you never want anyone to open. Oded Fehr, who again plays Ardeth Bey, the Ultra Magi warrior, does a good job at hyping up Imhotep's return and the powers that he's going to have.
power over the sands, and the glory of invincibility.
I'm not really sure why he used the word glory to describe invincibility, but it sounds pretty cool. So we get another awesome transition into the present time from 3,000 years ago when this happened to Imhotep. It shows the sand and the wind blowing the statue of Anubis. And now we're in this battle with a bunch of people that are trying to take over the city of the dead and find the treasure. So again, Oded Fehr, the narrator who plays the Ultra Magi warrior Ardeth Bey, lets us know that he and his little group here are the descendants of Pharaoh's bodyguards.
The descendants of Pharaoh's sacred bodyguards kept watch.
And it's their sacred mission to make sure that no one uncovers Imhotep and brings him back, because that's going to destroy the whole world. It seems like they're not really doing a great job since so many people seem to know about this ancient city, and they also very rarely get involved. You'd think that they would have set this up as a base or set up some defenses or something, anything than what they did. So this is where they introduce Ultraman Rick O'Connell, who's basically the main character of the movie, and we also get introduced to Benny, who's kind of a funny comic relief villain who you love to hate. He's kind of a coward, but he's always fun to watch. While the actor that plays Benny does seem to have a pretty recognizable face, I looked through IMDb and I can't remember seeing him in anything I've seen before, so let me know in the comments if he's in anything else big, but I didn't recognize him for anything else. So right away, Benny drops his gun, showing us that he's a coward. Kind of makes you wonder how he and Rick ever developed any kind of friendship. So, and again, speaking of Ultraman Rick O'Connell, he's not even taking cover. He's just blasting people left and right. He's not taking damage. No one's hitting him. I mean, these guys are worse than stormtroopers apparently when it comes to trying to hit any kind of target. And normally this would be annoying in a movie where they just let the character survive because the plot needs him to survive, but because Brendan Fraser plays Rick O'Connell so awesome, you just love every second of it. So this scene here where the sand just starts throwing itself all over the place and then eventually turns into a face, this is one of many moments that I'll mention throughout the movie where a normal person would have looked at that and said, yeah, I'm gonna go home now, and then the mummy would have never come out and no one would have died. So after the battle ends and Rick O'Connell runs into the desert, Ardeth Bey, the Ultra Magi warrior, says, as if somehow him and the other Magi had anything to do with it. So next we change locations to Cairo, where we're introduced to the way too hot librarian Evie Evelyn, who is played by Rachel Weisz. They tell us right away that she's very smart, but she's kind of a klutz. And basically the only reason that her boss puts up with her at all is because her parents were his best patrons. And her parents, I think, are brought up one other time in the entire movie. But it sounds like business owners in Egypt really take care of their customers. I mean, your parents were my best patrons, so now you get a job and you get to live with me for a while. Usually here we're lucky if we get like a $5 off coupon. So for some reason she's walking around her place of work like it wasn't always creepy. Her brother Jonathan pops out of the sarcophagus and pushes this corpse like right in her face. It's beyond me why she didn't just hit the thing with her torch. And Jonathan is introduced as the good comic relief who's mostly here to hand Evie the MacGuffin that's going to lead her to the mummy later on in the movie. Again, why the Magi would put a map inside of the key that leads to the location that they don't want anyone to go to is, again, beyond me. So next up, Evie and Jonathan go into this prison to try to find the person who owns the map, which turns out to be Ultraman Rick O'Connell. Not sure why two English people are able to just walk into this Arab prison and start asking questions and kind of get whatever they want. So Ultraman Rick O'Connell recognizes Jonathan pretty quickly as a pickpocket who took the map out of his pocket at some point, and he just 1-inch punches Jonathan in the face. So this doesn't bother Evie at all. I'm thinking Jonathan gets hit in the face on a regular basis. She leans into Ultraman Rick O'Connell and she's like, "Can you tell me where Hamunaptra is?" And he gives her this look like, "Are you serious?" Rick tells Evie to lean in. "You really want to know? You really want to know?" And then he kisses her. which I do not think they would do in 2024. So apparently Rick is sentenced to death because he had way too of a good time. But of course, Evie needs Rick to take her to Hamunaptra so she can find the treasure. She starts negotiating. She's a very natural negotiator with the prison warden.
I will give you £100 to save this man's life.
And she's offering him money, and then he touches her leg, which again, something that probably would not be allowed in movies in 2024. So the warden is not happy with Evie's offering so far, so he tells the person, pull the switch. Of course, Ultraman Rick O'Connell's neck does not break because he's just too manly for this thing to break his neck. So she just keeps negotiating, she offers more money, and eventually they make a settlement, and she smiles very proudly. So next up, they're walking to the boat that's going to take them, we don't know where, they're just taking them to the next location. And Evie is just talking about how Rick is just a scoundrel and there's nothing good about him.
He's filthy, rude, a complete scoundrel. I don't like him one bit.
And then he shows up, cleanly shaven, perfect hair, and he's got this look on his face like he doesn't, like he's trying to play it off like he doesn't know that he's Brendan Fraser and he doesn't know how good he looks. So just a question for you guys, you can leave your answer in the comments, but have you ever had someone look you up and down the way Evie looked at Ultraman Rick O'Connell, like, oh my god. So even though Jonathan just got 1 inch punched in the face by Ultraman Rick O'Connell, he just gives Rick this look like,
he's a man.
So next up we see some magi on a little paddle boat. They're heading towards the big boat. This is, again, one of the few times in the entire movie that we ever see the magi proactively try to stop anyone from getting to Hamunaptra. So next up we find out that the Americans are also going to Hamunaptra. They've got someone also that knows the way to Hamunaptra. So they all make a little bet. Whoever gets there first is going to get $500. So Ultraman Rick O'Connell says the bet's on. He squeezes Jonathan's shoulder like it's a bag of chips. So Evie's hanging out, sitting at a table. She's still mad at Rick because of that kiss. He unrolls his satchel of guns like it's a big schlong. Evie smiles at him and she's like, are we going into battle? So there's no indication that the boat is going to be arriving at whatever destination we're heading to anytime soon. So Rick is just unloading these guns and putting them all together just to show that he's Ultraman Rick O'Connell. So at this point in the movie, we're reintroduced to Benny as the person who is leading the Americans to Hamunaptra. Rick, of course, just throws Benny off of the boat.
Goodbye, Benny.
Again, Benny is not really someone you like, but it's always fun to watch him. He's just a fun character to watch get beat up. I think I would have liked to see Benny redeem himself at some point. It would have been cool to see him in like a sequel or something like that. Again, he's just fun to watch. So next up, we see Evie in her room in her pajamas just stumbling around like she's drunk. Apparently, when Ultraman Rick O'Connell kissed her at the prison, she just hasn't been able to get it out of her mind, and she's just walking around like,
oh, for heaven's sake, girl, it wasn't that good of a kiss anyway.
So she leans down to pick up her brush or whatever, and then she sees the Magi guy in the mirror, and he's like, where's the map? So that's when Ultraman Rick O'Connell shows up with his dual pistols, and he's just unloading. He really embraces that American-style shooting.
Very American. Fire enough bullets and hope to hit the target.
So apparently everything on this boat is super flammable, and no one on the boat has any fire suppressant accessories or skills of any kind whatsoever. The ship is just completely engulfed in flames. So Rick's taking cover and reloading his pistols, and that's when Evie pulls him away, and he almost takes a shot to the back of the head. This is another one of those moments, again, one of the many moments in the movie where if she hadn't moved him aside, again, movie over. This is a pretty cool scene where we get to see Ultraman Rick O'Connell really going in for those body shots. And again, another very quick but good transition into them just jumping into the water to the next scene where everybody's in the water. Again, really good transitions in this movie. Not sure why Benny was so upset about being on the other side of this very shallow river. I mean, clearly all the people were able to handle getting onto the other side, so I'm sure the horses would be fine, but whatever. So next up, we see the gang getting some camels so they can ride over to the next location. We see Rick and Evie giving themselves a little bit more googly eyes. So as Rick and the gang approach the area of Hamunaptra, Ultra Magi Warrior Ardeth Bay sees Rick from like 20, 30 miles away. I don't know how far they are, but apparently both of them can see each other clearly because he says, "This one is strong." So they must both have elf eyes or something like that. So again, I probably shouldn't be focusing on these little details, but as soon as the sun rises, all the clouds in the previous scene just disappear.
For what?
So they all get to Hymenoptera and they start doing their digging and everything like that. I'm not really sure why no one here needs any kind of permit or permission from Egypt to just pillage this ancient Egyptian city. Okay. One of the Americans looks over at our group and they say, do they, is there something that they know that we don't know? And of course the Egyptologist just says,
they're led by a woman. What does a woman know?
Again, something that wouldn't work in a 2024 movie. So next up, we see Ultraman Rick O'Connell completely break character here. He walks up to Evie and he's super nervous and he's just like, hey, I got you this bag of tools that I stole from the Americans. I thought you might need it, might like it, might like it, need it.
I thought you might like it, you might need it.
So the mating process is starting to begin with Ultraman Rick O'Connell and the way too hot librarian Evie. So Ultraman Rick O'Connell and the team go down underground inside the temple or whatever, and it's super dark. Luckily, there's a bunch of reflective metal things that they can just shine onto each other, and it lights up the whole room. I'm sure at some point the production team probably said, hey, if a lot of this is taking place underground, it's probably going to be super dark. And then the main producer probably said,
thank God we invented the, whatever device.
So they're walking through the hallway and they start hearing bugs just all around them. Again, another scene where if they were any kind of normal person, they would have just said, it's time to leave. Movie over. So Rick and the gang run into our American friends. And again, just another great example of Evie's just natural negotiation skills.
If we're going to play together, we must learn to share.
She says, all right, we're just going to go dig somewhere else. And even Rick is just like, so the prison warden wanders off to go find his own treasure. He finds some scarabs that are apparently made of blue gold. I actually Googled this. I didn't know blue gold was a thing, but apparently it is a thing. So next up we see the Americans and the Egyptologist who are trying to break into whatever this thing is. And they say, oh, you should probably let the diggers do it. Which, they could have said workers, but they decided to go with diggers. So I feel like if this were 2024 workers, when he was just yelling, Cieda! Cieda! They probably would have just quit, and then the movie would have been over. So next up, we go back to Ultraman Rick O'Connell and Evie and Jonathan. Evie's explaining the process of mummification.
And then they take out your heart as well.
And Jonathan is an expert in Egypt stuff, as well as Rick O'Connell, so I'm not sure why either one of them are pretending that they don't know about mummification. So when the sarcophagus falls, this is another scene. Again, it just lands on Jonathan or Evie and Ultraman Rick O'Connell, and again, movie over. So next up, we see the prison warden who's just running and screaming, holding his head because the bug is probably eating his brain, and he just runs into the wall and unalives himself. Another scene where the movie would have been over, they would have seen that and just said, okay, time to go home. So next up, the Magi just bust into camp and just start deleting people at random. If their intention was to just kill everyone, I'm not sure why they didn't just sneak in and kill everyone at night when they were sleeping. Again, as far as the Magi being descendants of Pharaoh's bodyguards, that totally makes sense considering just they never have a plan for anything. They just bust in and yeah. So Jonathan's just sitting there with his bottle and he just blasts some guy randomly. And basically doesn't even address the fact that he just murdered someone. I'm thinking that Jonathan must be like a serial killer or something that we just don't know about. So Ultraman Rick O'Connell has a perfect shot on Ultra Magi Warrior Ardeth Bay, but instead of shooting him, he decides to jump on him and they get into like a little fight, and then he does a little barrel roll, and then for some reason there's a stick of dynamite that was just sitting by the fire, and that ends the whole thing. Why a stick of dynamite was next to the fire? Again, nobody seems to have a great plan of survival here. And again, Evie and Jonathan seem to have no problem with murder or attempted murder on their own lives. Jonathan is already passed out drunk like 5 minutes after this ends, and Evie is so drunk that she tries to kiss Ultraman Rick O'Connell and then just passes out on his lap. So next up we see the Egyptologist with the Americans. They get this treasure chest. He starts reading the text on the treasure chest and it spells it out completely. If you guys open this chest, the mummy is going to come after you and he's going to delete you. So of course Benny, being the coward, he immediately runs out just yelling, "Beware the curse! Beware the curse!"
Beware of the curse! Beware! Stupid
At this point, Benny could have just gone home, but instead he just runs down the hallway. So next up, we go back to Ultraman, Rick O'Connell, and Evie. Jonathan and Rick pry open the sarcophagus, and the mummy pops there. We're not really sure why this mummy would decompose more slowly after being buried alive with a bunch of scarabs. So Evie identifies some fingernail marks inside the sarcophagus, and then there's these really deep marks that he's able to carve in there that says death is just the beginning. Those are some super, super deep marks, and I'm not sure how he was able to do any of that if he was eaten. So the Egyptologist who told the Americans to make sure that they take the curses very seriously, we see him here in the next scene just trying to pry this book open, and Evie, for some reason, just tells the competition.
I believe you need a key to open that book.
So the Egyptologist falls asleep holding this book that he's been searching his entire life for. Evie takes that book over to her camp, and guess what? The key that opens the sarcophagus that the Magi didn't want anyone to be able to open also opens the book that resurrects the thing that they never wanted to come back. So let's have one key that opens up multiple things that we don't want anyone to ever touch or mess with. So Evie opens up the book, the wind howls. Again, another moment where the movie would have been over. Let's just go home. So Evie reads the first couple sentences on the first page of the book, which apparently is exactly what you need to read to bring back Imhotep, the mummy, who is going to have superpowers and destroy the whole world now. The Egyptologist yells and says, "You must not read from the book!
You must not read from the book!
Even though in the last scene, he was trying to pry the book open, but I wasn't going to read it. I wasn't going to read it. So immediately the first plague starts ravaging the area, all the locusts, and it cuts to the Egyptologist just sitting there like, what have we done?
What have we done?
You know exactly what you did. You warned everybody that this was a bad idea, but you did it anyway. So everybody's running away. The first guy falls down, his glasses break, he runs into the mummy, and for some reason he just takes the tongue and the eyes of this guy, even though later on in the movie he sucks people dry in like 2 seconds, but okay. We also see one of the diggers get eaten alive by the scarabs in like 2 seconds, which again contradicts what Evie said about being eaten alive very, very slowly, but we'll let that one go. We'll let it go. So next up, Evie runs into the mummy. The mummy looks at her for a couple of seconds, and then he calls her a Noxunamun. So Ultraman Rick O'Connell pops in to save Evie, and then the mummy goes, and then Rick O'Connell just goes, and then he hits him with a shotgun. So they run away, and then we see Benny, our favorite comic relief villain. I'm not sure what direction he was running in when he ran out of the room last time, but he ended up back in the same room that he ran out of earlier, which bumps him right back into the mummy. And really the only reason that this happens is so that he can team up with the mummy and be a translator so that Imhotep can speak Egyptian and not English. So Benny starts pulling out all these different religious artifacts that he has, which is totally within character for him. I actually really like that he carries this around, and I think this was a good way to team Benny up with Imhotep. So next up, we're back in Cairo, and Ultraman Rick O'Connell and Evie are arguing like a married couple.
Fine.
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 So Rick goes to the bar and runs into this super cute old man. His very first line of dialogue explains his purpose in the movie.
I'm the last of the Royal Air Corps still stationed out here, you know.
But we're going to let that one go because he's so cute and everything. Next up, we're in a room with the guy who had his eyes and his tongue ripped out. I'm not sure why this guy was left unguarded, or at least somebody to have company with. But Imhotep is here with Benny. Prince Imhotep, he calls him, even though Imhotep is not a prince. If anything, I think Imhotep would probably want to be called like King Imhotep or the God Imhotep, but he's called Prince Imhotep. So he's there to finish the job and absorb the rest of this guy. So we go back to the bar where everybody's about to take a shot. They take the shot and it tastes like blood. I know that one of the plagues is turning water into blood. I didn't know that alcohol also turns into blood. So this basically tips the team off to let them know that Imhotep is here and he's probably doing bad things. So Ultraman Rick O'Connell shows up, and again, he's just unloading into Emotep with that American-style shooting. He gets hit and sent back with enough force to just send him flying into the Americans. But he's Ultraman Rick O'Connell, so of course he doesn't take any damage. We're told here that cats are the guardians of the underworld, which is why Emotep flees when a cat shows up. Objectively, Emotep could know that cats are the guardians of the underworld, but based on that look of horror on his face, the cats in the underworld must have done some really messed up things to him there. One of the other superpowers that were shown right away with Emotep is the total eclipse. Again, not sure why this didn't send a panic throughout the entire world, because obviously people in other parts of Egypt are going to notice a total eclipse. This Egyptologist is just asking to get absorbed in whatever Emotep does, because he's just running around alone all by himself. So in the next scene here, we see Benny rummaging through some things, trying to find the key or the map, one of those two things I'm sure he's looking for. That's when Ultraman Rick O'Connell shows up and throws a chair at Benny. I'm pretty sure the only other movie that I've seen someone just throw a chair at someone kind of like that is the movie Nobody. So this scene here, I just wanted to leave a quick comment and just say that the CGI face that they did for Emotep actually looks pretty good for the 90s. So again, we know that Emotep is running around and just eliminating all the people that opened up that chest and just sucking them dry. But for some reason, people keep separating, and this is how the next guy ends up getting absorbed. So, you know, I have a hard time just falling asleep on a normal day, but Evie is just constantly either falling asleep or passing out drunk, even though throughout this entire movie, she's constantly being hunted or almost killed. I'm not sure what her normal day-to-day life was like before this movie, but it's almost like everything here is just like another Tuesday for her.
But for me, it was Tuesday.
So the next power that we're introduced to that Emotep has is apparently mind control on all these people, but for some reason the mind control doesn't work on the main characters, so I'm thinking it must be like a Jedi mind trick. It only works on the weak-minded. So I just have written here that Jonathan chanting Emotep works because the movie needs it to work and they need Jonathan to escape, and we're totally okay with this because we all love Jonathan. I don't know why I've got this weird attention to detail, but for some reason there's one dude in the crowd that's just wearing some weird hood thing. So Emotep and Benny show up and they basically say, give us Evie. If you give us Evie, we're going to let you all go. Rick looks at Emotep and he says,
I'll be seeing you again.
And Emotep gives Rick this look like Thanos looked at Star-Lord.
I like you.
So of course Emotep sends all the mind control idiots to kill Rick and the team, even though he could have very easily just done it himself. But again, the movie has to go on, so that's why this happened. So again, this is another scene where one of the characters didn't really need to die. I mean, there was plenty of time for him to escape, but the movie needed to have less players for the boss fight later on, so that's why they got rid of him. So in the next scene, we're reintroduced to the cute old man who's a pilot. He has a plane. He's literally only in this movie to fly them to the next scene. And again, we're all totally okay with it because he's such a cute old man.
Ha ha ha! Winston Havelock, at your service, sir.
So they're flying through the desert and they see this giant tornado and the cute pilot's just like,
See that? I've never seen one so big.
That's what she said.
So Emotep uses his superpowers to create a giant wall of sand, and they dive down to try to avoid it. You'd think that higher altitude would have been the solution in this problem, but again, we need to have less players for the boss fight later, so that's why they went with this route. And here we can see Winston literally sinking out of the scene. So in the next scene, Ultraman Rick O'Connell and Ultra Magi Warrior Ardeth Bay are removing these rocks, trying to clear a path so they can get inside, and Jonathan is messing around with the blue gold scarabs, and one of them gets inside his hand, and Ultraman Rick O'Connell just gets out his knife and just pops it out like he's done it 1,000 times. So in this scene, I'm not really sure if Evie was knocked out or if she just fell asleep, but she is just constantly throughout the movie falling asleep or just passed out drunk. So I don't know why I like this scene so much, but Ultraman Rick O'Connell just lights a match on Ultra Magi Warrior Ardeth Bay's face. And I feel like that's a sign of respect. That's a way of Rick saying,
This is a
man.
So in the next scene, we see Ultraman Rick O'Connell. Somehow he gets a hold of one of the swords. And of course, because he's Ultraman Rick O'Connell, he's amazing with a sword. So in this next scene, we see Ultraman Rick O'Connell, who gets hit multiple times with enough force to send him flying. But of course, he's Ultraman Rick O'Connell. He doesn't take any damage. He's totally fine.
No problem.
And really, all Imhotep had to do in this scene was just pay attention to the two people that were reading from his only weakness. So they read the text. Imhotep becomes mortal. He gets stabbed by Ultraman Rick O'Connell. He stumbles back into the death water. And then he lets us know that there's going to be a sequel by saying, death is only the beginning. If Benny had set this treasure down anywhere else, this wouldn't have happened. He would have been in the sequel. What's wrong with you, Benny? So this scene here where Benny is crawling, like always, triggers my claustrophobia. So the last scene that we see Benny in is his torch is about to go out, and then all of the scarabs are coming at him, and we just hear him go. So I guess they could introduce him as like another mummy in a future movie. That'd be a cool way to get Benny back. Jonathan comments about how they're getting out of there with no treasure.
Well, I guess we go home empty-handed. Again.
Which, I mean, they know exactly where Hamunaptra is. They could easily dig that treasure up, I think, if they wanted to. So Ultraman Rick O'Connell and the way too hot librarian Evie are now officially a couple. She sits on his lap. She probably looked at him like, is that your gun? And he was probably like, nope. So in the last scene, we see them ride off into the sunrise or sunset, I'm not really sure, with Benny's big bag of treasure. One of the rare times in a movie where we're actually told that the characters end with a happy ending, and they end up rich, which is pretty cool too. So that does it for The Mummy. This movie came out at the end of the 90s. Something about that period of time created some really cheesy but really great movies. I watch this movie maybe once or twice a year. It's really fun. It's really a great time. There are some sequels. I like those too. We'll get into those at a little bit later time. I would say I would give this movie 7 out of 10 sacred jars. So that does it for my first video. Let me know in the comments what other movies you want me to watch and give my commentary on. I'll also do reviews for some newer movies that are going to come out, and I'll give some movie news and things like that. But that does it for my first video. Thank you all for showing up, and I look forward to the next one. Thank you. Bye.